Hey guys, welcome back to another video in my tanking series. Today we'll be covering the Blood Death Knight in Shadowlands. We'll look at what changes have been made and how those changes affect the way we tank. For those of you who are familiar with the Blood DK, you'll be happy to hear that really not much has changed. We've so far avoided any significant nerfs and in fact have had several buffs. First, let's start with our basic overview, as always. The Blood DK is a reactive tank that relies on healing back the damage we've already taken, as opposed to actively mitigating incoming damage. This is an extremely self-sufficient, independent tank, if that's something you like. And with that short introduction, let's get into our basic tank rotation and combat flow. The Death Knight has two resource systems, runes and runic power. Runes will passively recharge and refill over time, and this is the resource we'll use for most of our abilities. Runic power needs to be built up, and this is the resource we use to heal ourselves with Deathstrike. This would be a good time to briefly mention our mastery, which grants us a physical damage absorption shield based on how much our Deathstrike healed us for. The way the Blood DK rotation plays out is quite simple. Cast Death and Decay or Blood Boil on a pack of mobs to grab Snap AoE threat. Use your Morrowind ability to maintain 5 stacks of Bone Shield, which is a buff given by Morrowind that gives us armor and haste. Morrowind costs 2 runes and generates no runic power, so it's important to not spam this ability and instead use it only as needed to maintain your 5 Bone Shield stacks. Heartstrike is another ability we have that costs only 1 rune and generates us a very decent amount of runic power, so we use this as our main filler ability to do some AoE damage and build up runic power. We then spend that runic power on Deathstrike, which heals us for 25% of all damage we took in the last 5 seconds. At minimum, it will heal us for 7% of our max HP. Deathstrike costs 45 runic power baseline. However, Ossuary is a new passive we have, which reduces the cost of Deathstrike down to 40 runic power while we have those 5 Bone Shield stacks. And that's our very basic tank rotation. With that out of the way, let's get into cooldowns, of which we have many. Starting with our defensive cooldowns, we have Icebound Fortitude. This reduces all damage we take by 30% for 8 seconds on a 3-minute cooldown. This will also break you out of stuns, although you don't really want to be using it just for that unless you're also taking heavy damage. Next up, we have Rune Tap. This used to be a talent and is now baseline. Rune Tap allows us to spend 1 rune to reduce damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds. We have 2 charges on a very short 25-second cooldown, although it should be said that you should not spam this ability as we need our runes to generate us runic power so we can heal. Raise Dead is a new baseline ability we're getting in Shadowlands that costs 1 rune to summon a ghoul who will attack our target for 1 minute on a 2-minute cooldown. While this is nice, we care about the ghoul only because of another new ability called Sacrificial Pact, which will kill off our ghoul and heal us for 25% of our max HP. This will cost 20 runic power. You should think of this as a poor man's Deathstrike to be used only in emergencies where you're about to die and don't have enough runic power to use your Deathstrike. Vampiric Blood is our strongest defensive ability. On a 1.5 minute cooldown, we increase our max HP by 30% and increase all healing and absorbs received by 30% for 10 seconds. Please note that this increase to healing received counts both for our own self-heals and absorbs, and also for any heals and absorbs given by our healer. Since we have a lot of ways to heal ourselves and give ourselves absorption shields, this cooldown is incredibly powerful for us. Lichborn is a returning ability in Shadowlands, which will make us immune to fears, charms, and sleeps, and increase our leech by 10% for 10 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. This is a nice addition to the toolkit, but isn't particularly powerful, and we should really pair it with vampiric blood to maximize its effect and our healing output. Last, but certainly not least, we have Anti-Magic Shell and Anti-Magic Zone. AMS is a personal CD we can use every minute to absorb incoming magic damage and prevent any further application of harmful magic effects. Worth noting is that magic damage we absorb with AMS will also generate us runic power. Anti-Magic Zone is a raid or party cooldown we can use on our group, which will reduce spell damage taken by 20% for 10 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. And that wraps up our baseline defensive CDs. Let's quickly go over our only DPS CD, outside of our new ghoul of course, and that's Dancing Rune Weapon. This will summon a copy of our weapon for 8 seconds that will simply mirror any melee attack we use on a 2-minute cooldown. This has a defensive component as well, since it also grants us a 40% parry chance. We have a couple of utility cooldowns that are worth talking about as well. Gorfiend's Grasp allows us to pull all enemies within 15 yards to our target's location. This is on an unfortunate 2-minute cooldown, and so should be used wisely for gripping in annoying caster mobs or other dangerous packs. Next, we have our Battle Res in Raise Ally, which allows us to revive a dead party or raid member while we're in combat every 10 minutes. This costs 30 runic power to cast. The only other things worth covering in our baseline toolkit are some utility options we have. Death Grip is our single target version of Gorfiend's Grasp and allows us to pull an enemy to us every 15 seconds. Asphyxiate is our baseline ranged stun ability. Mind Freeze is our baseline ranged interrupt, and Death's Advance is our lackluster baseline movement speed ability. Now with our baseline toolkit covered, let's move on to talents. The DK's talent tree is kind of interesting because so little of it is changing going into Shadowlands. This means unfortunately that our talent setup will look almost identical to what we ran in BFA. We will still take Heartbreaker in the first row for additional runic power generation off our Heartstrike. For the next row, we are of course still taking Hemostasis, which causes our Blood Boil to pretty massively buff our next Deathstrike. The level 30 row used to have Ossuary, but as that has now been made a baseline passive ability, we will likely take Relish in Blood instead. This provides us with some healing and runic power generation every time we use Death and Decay with a Crimson Scourge proc. Next, Will of the Necropolis is a very solid passive buff to our survivability if we ever get chunked down unexpectedly. This will be our go-to pick unless we anticipate a raid fight or Mythic Plus dungeon having a ton of magic damage, in which case we would take Anti-Magic Barrier. Our level 40 row is our utility row, so feel free to take whatever you like based on the content you do. Bloodworms is the best option for our level 45 row, since it will add passive damage and healing, and has a baked-in emergency heal if you fall below 50% HP. For our final talent row, we're almost always going to take Red Thirst. With Vampiric Blood being our strongest defensive CD, we of course want this up as much as possible, and Red Thirst will reduce its cooldown by almost half. Feel free to take Bone Storm if you're doing more solo content or simply want more damage in your dungeon, and feel free to take Purgatory if you're worried about being one-shot by a specific mechanic in a fight, since this will act as a cheat death effect, assuming you're running with healers. With talents done, I'm going to take this time to briefly talk about Rune Weapon enchants. The Rune Weapon system is unique to Death Knights and allows us access to some pretty powerful weapon enchants. I won't go through all of them since I don't want this video to be forever long. However, taking Fallen Crusader is a safe, all-purpose enchant. You should take the time to test the different options you have, as some of these are quite strong in certain situations. Finally, let's talk about which new legendary effects are looking best in Shadowlands. Thankfully for us, All of our legendary effects are quite good and can be used in different situations. If you want more offensive power, take Crimson Rune Weapon to have your Dancing Rune Weapon cooldown back more often. If you need a grouped cooldown option for heavy AoE damage intake, take Vampiric Aura, which gives your party members 15% increased healing received while you have Vampiric Blood up. If you're running high keys or other dangerous content and you need your Vampiric Blood off cooldown almost constantly, take Gorfiend's Domination. This will likely be the one I go for first. If you need more magic mitigation for a raid fight, take Death's Embrace, which increases the duration of AMS by 100% and heals you for any damage it absorbs. And that wraps up this tank guide for the Blood DK. Let me know if you have any questions, and comment below with which legendary you want first. Drop me a like and a sub if you like my content, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!